Welcome to week 3, where we are going to review charts and mourn our best ball portfolios because we are officially poor since we have no Saqoun Barkley. This is Stat Chasing.
Pat Fryer Helmo.
This is why I'm hot.
Anita Handjob.
Fix your sight.
Jamar. Alpha play chase.
Are you kidding me? Kadarius Toney?
You can't handle the heat.
It looks like we're finally fifth boys. You're right.
Week 3, we are, just basically a little bit over 20% of the way through the regular season so far until we get to fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, we've gotten what we're coming up on, and then so it's 16 weeks. So after next week, we'll be 25% of the way there.
I was going 14 weeks for fantasy play, and then week 15 fantasy play.
Oh, right, yeah. Sorry, I had a brain fart, but you're right. Week 4, you're right. So 25, something like 20% of the way there. And then even in main event season, we are actually a quarter of the way there.
Yeah.
In the regular season.
Yep.
And Saqoun Barkley, unfortunately, is still kicking our shit in.
It's taking our lunch money. Yeah. I did a little bit of a data dive and went back and looked at Best Ball Mania 4 advance rates from every week, basically, through week 14 and wanted to see what percentage.
How predictive.
Yeah, what percentage of teams that were advancing, say, in week 3, were still advancing by the time it got to week 14. It didn't make me feel any better. It was like surprising how sticky it was. So not great. If you're thinking it's a long season, we got a lot of time for stuff to come together. That's true, but also it's not that long.
Right. And what makes me feel better is when you have a high advance rate season because you hit on a few key players, when you get to the playoffs, you're just really relying on that same player that everybody else has. And a lot of those extra teams that you get in are weak outside of that one player. Whereas when in these kind of and hopefully it's not, but in what's looking like a low advance rate season, the teams that you do get through, despite not having that player, tend to be really good. So that's kind of that's my copium.
That's some grade A copium. I mean, what I'm relying on at this point is that I mean the only guy that I've really faded where I'm like, yeah, that's one where if knowing what I know now, like getting to see it play out, if I could go back, I probably would draft more Saqoun. But honestly,
Right.
All the other fades, like I'm still okay fading Alvin Kamara after seeing this week. I think talking about the Saints is going to be really interesting. With that, we should segue to the charts because the Saints are a really interesting one to me. I think talking about them as a team from the quarterback chart is a good segue here. But we were lied to, Drico. We thought that the Saints were this high-flying, going to be exciting offense. They were doing all this play action, all this pre-snap motion. We were pretty sure that Kubiak had unchained them and Derek Carr was going to be the best version of himself we'd ever seen. And it turns out the Saints aren't actually pass-heavy. We thought they might be just purely because they didn't have to pass in those.
So the Saints are minus 11% pass rate over expectation. So they're 11% under expectation, and so they were like that even in high run heavy game scripts before. They were they were actually passing less than a low expectation, and so now they entered a game where their expectation is a little higher, and they still passed way underneath that. So minus 11% on the year.
Yeah, the minus 11% on the year is definitely concerning. I really, what it just tells me is we might have jumped the gun a little bit on the Saints being such a fun offense. They'll probably be an efficient offense, but they just might not have the volume to ascend to this truly elite offense. So, I mean, we're seeing Derek Carr start to come back down to earth with his adjusted yards per attempt after a down game against the Eagles there. But I think that as a whole, the Saints will still be fine for fantasy, but it might not be the scorched earth season that we were thinking after the first 2 weeks.
Yeah. I guess and so I think you'd noted in the private chat that I was having some audio issues. Just want to make sure now that we're at the start of the show. Do you think have we fixed those? Have I fixed it?
Let me talk. I can still hear myself echo a tiny bit through your end, but I'm not sure if that's just coming through for me or if that's everyone. So if you're in the chat, please let us know if you're getting some echo.
Okay. Thanks for the all good. And so on Derek Carr, I guess they did go for those deep shots to Shaheed. Just the difference this week is that they missed on those.
Right.
They had some nice completions to Olave, but it does make me wonder is if when they on the weeks where they hit on deep shots to Shaheed, they're going to be efficient, and on the weeks where they don't, they're not. Like it might be too early to be at that conclusion, but that's kind of the direction I'm heading.
Yeah, I think the efficiency still can be there as a whole with or without the deep shots in a given week. Obviously the weeks where they hit the deep shots are going to be a lot more fun. I just think that the volume is not really going to be there. Now, granted,
no volume.
The Eagles didn't really.
And they were at 4.7 adjusted yards per attempt this week. After 14.9, 11.3, so, and maybe I'm being too binary here, but missing on those deep shots is going to make a big difference there, and I do think that's a big part of the difference.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I definitely
non-derogatory. I hope.
No, yeah, not non-derogatory. That's fair. Let's move on from Derek Carr and go to the right side of the chart, but still someone with an extremely high adjusted yards per attempt, and that is Andy Dalton. I don't think anyone is under the delusion that Andy Dalton is going to maintain north of a 10 adjusted yards per attempt and this level of volume, but I think we definitely could get some fun quarterback games out of Andy Dalton. What do you think is a reasonable kind of range to project for him going forward?
That's really difficult. I think you can probably get that 20. Honestly, I think it's achievable for him to get something along the lines of 20 points a game. Because the Panthers obviously they beat the Raiders pretty badly, but they still don't seem like this great team, so they probably will have to throw a lot. But some of the things that stand out to me about Andy Dalton here is that his time to throw is really low. His ADOT was really low, and yet he was having this great efficiency, great success. And I do know that half the Raiders defense was kind of injured this week, including what's the defensive end that they have?
Max Crosby.
Yeah, he had some foot pain or something like that. So I do wonder if they were missing some kind of key starter this week, and there was a liability on their team that they were just going over and over again, and that had some big piece to do with their success, because it seems very unusual to be able to throw quickly and short and then have efficiency over and over and over again. That doesn't strike me as something where that's going to be super sustainable. in the NFL.
Now remind me, who do they play this week? Is it? I want to say it's the Bengals. Is that right?
So Carolina Panthers. Oh yeah, they do play the Bengals because it's like, it's the makeup game, isn't it, for Andy Dalton?
There.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. So that could actually be a fun one. And you had mentioned when we were talking before the show that you thought Joe Burrow was in an interesting potential positive regression spot. So what do you think about Joe Burrow? Both from a season long level and also just in this matchup going forward against the Panthers.
So I think it depends. It depends on how much weight you want to give to that New England game. He played pretty poorly in that game, and you can make the excuse that they lost T. Higgins late in the week, that Jamar Chase was just back from a holdout, and that caused some big issues. But if you include that, and then also include the game last night where they were super efficient, but then playing this kind of bad defense, and then you add the Chiefs game in, he's been playing pretty efficiently. So they have he's at 8.2 adjusted yards per attempt, which is pretty good. And then when you look at the touchdown stuff, so they've been under about 0.8 touchdowns over his expectation. So he's been playing well in terms of the yardage and stuff like that. They just haven't been getting the touchdowns. So to me, and they've actually been throwing a decent amount. So their pass rate over expectation over those 3 weeks is 7%, and they've been at a 70% rate. So they've been throwing a lot, throwing on a yardage basis pretty efficiently, but they've underachieved when it comes to the touchdowns. Against, the Patriots and then the Chiefs, having those be 2 of the 3 games, like, I think that more than balances out having the Commanders game in there as well. So that kind of strikes me as him playing well, and then I don't know how much this is going to sustain over the season, given that they lost. It looks like a key offensive lineman, but they've been 5th in the league in pass block win rate. So I think that does strike me as, despite it being somewhat disappointing start, that does strike me as something where you could get a lot of fantasy goodness there.
Yeah, definitely an interesting game to attack potentially on both sides, both quarterbacks. Do you think it's a fair assessment to say both of these guys will probably remain in this top right quadrant as we progress throughout the season?
So I think Joe Burrow is. I feel pretty confident that he's going to have a good year this year. They're 0-3. They're probably feeling pretty bad, and the Commanders' loss is going to be painful. Their defense doesn't seem to be playing very well either. But their offense, their passing offense, is playing at a pretty high level. They've just underachieved on the touchdowns. Andy Dalton, I think, is probably going to get there on a lot more volume. I think he can probably be reasonable efficiency over the course of the year, but him being like top right, I don't see that. Like, and that's not a controversial thing to say. I think he can be pretty close to the middle, and maybe in that top right quadrant, but towards the bottom left of it.
But like a Jared Goff type efficiency or a Dak Prescott type efficiency, maybe with like a Matt Stafford efficiency kind of as a
yeah in that range. You're not comping them to those players. You're saying that in this range,
correct.
He can be certainly, because the other thing that's interesting about the Panthers, and let me pull this up so that I have the exact number. Oh, God damn it. Andy Dalton, there he is. I guess the other thing to note, their O-line has not been the best. So their pass block win rate is just 50%. And then Andy Dalton, he was able to overcome that with just a 2 seconds time to throw and throwing short. So yeah, I'm just as I dig deep dive more into this. That does strike me as something where if they play a team with a little better coverage, they could struggle a lot more than that for sure. But with the caveat that there will be volume there, and then I think I remember one of the key stats of the game for the Bengals being that their pass rush win rate was really bad. So they were they only got pressure on Jayden Daniels something like 10% of the time, and that was a big part of him winning. Or if they struggle again against the Panthers and give him time, then I certainly you could see some more production from the Panthers.
Yeah, I think that all is pretty reasonable. So definitely looking forward to that Cincinnati and Carolina game this week. Let's move on to a couple other bright spots on the quarterback chart. We'll focus on two of the best passers in the league, and that is Sam Darnold and Brock Purdy, just like we all expected. Sam Darnold getting this efficiency with an absolutely absurd touchdown rate of over 10%. I mean, he is just lighting it up. Brock Purdy is this efficient with surprisingly a 4.2% touchdown rate. So do you think that, I mean, it kind of all fits together neatly when you kind of think through it logically for the 49ers, but when they start getting some of their weapons back, if Purdy plays as well as he's been playing, I mean, it could be a pretty massive positive regression spot for Purdy if he just converting more of these touchdowns.
Yeah, I agree. And talking about some of the O-line stuff. So he has over the season is a 3.2 seconds time to throw, which is one of the highest. And their O-line is really good. They have the play action pass. So all of that is kind of coming together for a really high yardage per attempt. And that's despite, like you said, a low touchdown rate. So coming in under expectations. So when they get their weapons back, that could certainly be some fireworks. I guess the only thing that about the big game he had against the Rams are kind of profiling as this kind of get right defense as well, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I was making a list of the teams that you want to be. I mean, we're only 3 games in, but it's already starting to get clear who you want to be targeting for fantasy. And the Rams are certainly one. The Panthers are definitely one. The Bengals, the Commanders, the Cowboys. Those are all really, teams where you're really happy to be starting your weapons against them, just because they have a combination of most of those teams are pretty poor defensively, and they're also willing to pass. I would throw the Colts in there as well, because the Colts have a pretty bad defense, and they've been playing fast. Anthony Richardson either throwing a touchdown or throwing an interception. So
and then I guess so. I'm just looking at the adjusted yards per attempt for Purdy by week. So he's got in week 1 he was 8. Week 2, 8.2, and then 11.8 on in week 3. So I think it's fair to say that third week is kind of an outlier, but still going to live in the top right hand side of this chart.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just kind of, if you're in one of these Shanna-scan systems, like. It is what you need to win in the NFL right now, and guys they're executing the systems they're in well enough to be very efficient, and that is what's good in the league right now. That, or you can just do what Kyler Murray is doing and add some yardage on the ground as well, and also just be able to hit Marvin Harrison Jr. for deep bombs. But the extra touchdown of fantasy production. Plus every game from the rushing yards certainly doesn't hurt Kyler Murray. and he actually gets the matchup of the week, where you get Jayden Daniels, where these guys are kind of similar in, they're both rushing quarterbacks. They're both, they're not like some of the other rushing quarterbacks like Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, where they're more like the bigger bodied guys, like more physical, goal line vulture potential. These guys are just, they're more like the Lamar archetype, where they can just like really hurt you with their legs. Now, Kyler's not getting as much design stuff as Lamar is. I think Lamar leads both Daniels and Kyler as far as how many design runs he's getting. But both of these guys will really make the defense pay if they're just going to sit back and leave a lot of space. So I think both of them, especially with how weak the Commanders' defense has been, set up for a really fun back-and-forth shootout game. But, I mean, that's what I said about Philly and New Orleans this last week. We saw how that turned out.
Yeah. I guess the Philly New Orleans one, we were kind of expecting Philly to be this bad defense because they gave up a surprising amount of production to the Falcons the week before, but then maybe it either is a solid defense or they're solid against the run, and that's what New Orleans wanted to do. Whereas I guess now we have a little bit more data on these two defenses of them kind of getting shredded, that we can be a little bit more confident that they are actually the ones that you want to attack.
Yeah, and just to touch on the Philly and New Orleans game, I mean, that game had a potential still to be a shootout. I know the final box score did not look like it, but I mean, really, it was a couple bad turnovers by the Eagles that I think let the Saints really like slow the game down and just be more comfortable doing it. Because if you don't have that Jalen Hurts interception in the end zone, which, to be fair to Jalen Hurts, that was actually just a bad route by Devonta Smith. Like he just did like the cardinal sin that you can do as a wide receiver, which is like turn and see the ball and then be like, all right, I'm just gonna wait here, hope it gets here on time, and just left it open for Tyrann Mathieu to jump the route and go ahead and take that away in the end zone. That was pretty frustrating to see as someone who was playing Hurts and Devonta Smith in a lot of places. And then you also had the Jalen Hurts fumble later. So you just had stuff that, to stop points from getting on the board. And then the Saints did not agree with, our desire of having that game be a fast-paced, high-scoring game. And so they really kind of soured that one. But, I mean, if I were looking for a way for – I think both these games that we've kind of touched on early with the, Cardinals and Commanders and the Bengals and the Panthers, both of these ones, the way I really see them failing would be like the Cardinals get out to an early lead and they're willing to run the ball because they're happy to give a lot of carries to James Conner if they get the lead. I want to look up the Cardinals PROE here. And yeah, they have been a negative PROE team, just minus 4%. So, if they can get to a lead, only 52% pass rate. So they are willing to run the ball. So what you're really hoping for there is that the Commanders are going to get out to a lead and push the Cardinals.
Right.
What do you
and I think that's a fair expectation, right? Where like they I think I saw something that the Commanders have not had to punt in like 2 weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
The last two games they haven't had to punt. And then Daniels is like he's so dynamic where he's a rusher, he's like a productive thrower, and then they did add this kind of deep ball option to their offense now, which so they're stretched vertically as well. I think the way the game fails is if like the Commanders have like this come down game.
Yeah, I mean, really what you're just hoping for is Cliff Kingsbury is willing to get out of the way this time. Like he did it with Kyler where he did this horizontal raid thing and it was just, it left a lot to be desired. We saw that through the first two games with Daniels where he had the extremely low ADOT, like not, really the only reason that they weren't punting in the second game was because when magic needed to happen, Jayden Daniels was just like, I guess I'll go run for a first down, So
right.
I'm hopeful that after seeing Daniels uncork it, And the report after the game was that play to Terry McLaurin that was like the catch of the season so far. I think it had something like, Amazon had it as a 10% catch probability for that touchdown deep ball that Daniels hit him with. But allegedly, Terry McLaurin asked Cliff Kingsbury if they could have that play, and Cliff, so benevolently obliged and let his best players do the things that they're best at. So
that is kind of interesting. So I think you hit the nail on the head there that we need the Commanders to push the Cardinals, and that's the kind of base case, like most likely outcome.
I have a question for you, and this might be too gal brain, but when we think through these games, and we can kind of see like the path to failure for them. Do you think it's too gal brain to kind of like skew the way that you're playing the game to players that might be favored even a little bit more if the specific path that you're thinking is most beneficial for that true ceiling outcome for the game? Like for example, we're saying, okay, we need a big lead, from the Commanders to make
or just have to be scoring.
Yeah, we need them to be scoring. So really,
you're probably better off playing a true Daniels than
okay,
right?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. The other thing I was gonna say is like you probably really don't want to just play like a Cardinals thing without a bring back, right?
No, or even Cardinals and then Zach Ertz, like, or something like, or one of the kind of tertiary,
right?
That's probably like maybe that's going to be like a very conventional common thinking, but that seems like a very reasonable way to think about it. Like I think that won't end up being Galbrain at all. I think that might actually end up being like what people think is like, okay, deep ball to McLaurin is what unlocks this game, so that's the stack that you need. And that being I could. I don't know. I don't know for sure, but I could see that being like the popular way to think about it.
Okay. The next quarterback, we're kind of branching out here, talking about guys that are on the fringe of this quadrant that we want our quarterbacks to be in. To Dak Prescott, I mean, really, the game was it was almost over before it started. The Cowboys' defense just can't stop anyone. I mean, it played out exactly like we said it was going to play out. Like Derrick Henry came in and ran all over this putrid Cowboys rush defense, and then they got demoralized and just didn't stop anything all day. It was not.
Yeah, they were a dumpster fire. Like they were same thing after being a dumpster fire against the Saints. They were a dumpster fire against the Ravens. The vibes seem really bad there for that Cowboys team, and how that pertains to Dak Prescott is, so it looks like even with the high pass rate that they have on the season, which looks like 70%, they're still like completely neutral on pass rate over expectation, and then they seem pretty average to below average on the overall efficiency stuff. So to me, that kind of strikes me as like they've got a good quarterback on a bad team, and so the volume will probably be okay because they're going to be losing, but the efficiency is going to struggle there. Is my read.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw this stat, but did you see that the Cowboys' EPA per play for rushing plays is actually higher than their EPA per play for passing plays? And I don't know if you've subjected yourself to watching every Cowboys snap, but I got to tell you, the rushing plays don't look great. So,
right. Something must be going horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is there's just so much passing volume. They've been in desperation mode for multiple games now, and so you're just getting this huge amount. Dak Prescott has 134 dropbacks on the season, like compared to Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins is at 90. Justin Herbert is almost at 50% of the number of dropbacks Dak is at. Now, that's not fair because Herbert missed a little bit of time, but I mean, 134 dropbacks. I believe that leads Oh, nope, I lied because we have Deshaun Watson at 141 dropbacks that I see down here.
So you're gonna. I think that does speak to volume on a bad team, but the QB is good, bringing that kind of efficiency to neutral. Over kind of like yardage stuff. It's probably low because of sacks, and then interceptions and stuff like that. But fantasy stuff, like I think it's been solid. And then I know this isn't the tight end section, but that does feel kind of strong for those kind of like secondary non-CeeDee Lamb options who may not be like great talents, but they're on a team that is bereft of talent, and so someone like Jake Ferguson can be a very big beneficiary of that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to we'll get out of the good part of the chart and look at some guys that just a week ago we were talking about how poor both of these guys have been playing, but signs of life for both Bo Nix and Caleb Williams. What do you think about these guys going forward? How much of this was just like a blip on the radar versus development? What are your thoughts here?
So starting with Caleb Williams, I think if you look at some of the throws that he made, they look really good. You can easily find some strong highlights of Caleb from that game, and it's good to see that kind of development where they started off cagey. He struggled mightily week 1, even struggled week 2, and then had at least put some good throws on tape for week 3. I guess you have to give that caveat that they were playing the Colts, who don't have the best defense. So you have to factor that in some. But it's definitely very encouraging to see that growth and development from Caleb. I guess the problem overall, especially for fantasy, is that the O-line is absolutely putrid. It is like god awful. And then you have Odunze playing well, and then it looks like Keenan Allen has plantar fasciitis, so it might be a while before he's back, and he does seem like an important piece for that team. And then did I miss some? I think I missed something. Is DJ Moore hurt, or like did he get an injury?
Not that I saw. No.
Okay. Okay. Maybe I'm mixing something up then. But he at least seems like disaffected.
Yeah, I mean, so much of his production in that game just came on, the Hail Mary that ended up being a yard short of a touchdown at halftime. I mean, I'll echo what you had to say about Caleb, where he's showing signs where he looks good. The problem is just terrible offensive line and terrible coaching. Fantasy football aside, the most frustrating thing that I keep hearing is, oh man, I mean, Caleb Williams, so much talent, but is he coachable? Maybe he's not listening, and that's why he's not developing. And that is like the most bullshit, like protect Shane Waldron water carrying stuff I've ever heard. Like, right. Anyone that you hear that's saying something like that is like an immediate unreliable narrator. It's pure like I mean, I don't even really understand why. Like, what is the benefit to just like out and out lying about this guy? Like, oh, I mean, did you see on Hard Knocks he crossed his arms the one time when he was sitting in the meeting room with Shane Waldron? It was like, or with Eberflus. It's like, dude,
right?
That is not the reason that Caleb. He's not struggling because he crossed his arms and had poor body language one time. He's struggling because he's dealing with a couple incompetent morons that are like just running him into the ground. So, I mean, he might be good enough to just overcome that and give us some really fun fantasy stuff. That's what I
thought. Right. And we got a solid week this week, right?
Yeah.
On like a million dropbacks.
No, yeah, he was good. He was like a tournament winning quarterback before Dak Prescott came in and did all the garbage time stuff. But yeah, he was very solid on DraftKings. He was one of the best point per dollar plays.
Okay. And then if we want to switch it over, like I think we covered Caleb. If we want to switch it over to Bo Nix, he's another one where you see the development, you see the improvement, and he looks better. He objectively looked a lot better, or say I should say subjectively looked a lot better against the Bucs. But that's another one where I guess his O-line is a little better, and his time to throw is a little higher. But the issue for him then is they don't have a lot of receiving weapons around them.
Well, they might, but they just never see the field.
They never see the field, so that's one where it's also like it's week 3 of the rookie season, and I think somebody mentioned that it took CJ Stroud like till week 12 or something like that, something later in the season to put up a QB 12 week. So that they can continue to develop, and I hope they do, and then eventually put up big games. But it does look like they're both going through at least some rookie struggles, especially Bo Nix, that are sort of compounded by coaching and either bad receiving weapons or poor O-line.
Yeah, I think that is pretty well said. So definitely, we're leaving a light on for both these guys. Could certainly develop into something more fun. Nick's showing more rushing upside was really interesting. That was a big part of the reason I was happy to draft him, because I really thought he'd get something with his legs there, and then anything else is gravy. The most encouraging thing to me was in the previous games, the stuff that looked really bad to me was just like the very off target and like who was that to type throws farther down the field that were happening, where it was like I don't even know that he had his eyes open, he's missing a receiver so badly, or like throwing into like three is like the three closest people to the ball were all defenders, on multiple throws in the first couple weeks. I didn't really see hardly any of that this week. And now I didn't get to watch every snap from this game, but the passes I did see looked pretty sharp, looked on target. I mean, he was keeping the offense on schedule for the most part. It was much better. It was a big improvement for Nick. So another guy that I think is in an interesting spot this week, we kind of highlighted some fun games earlier where both sides look good, but this guy gets to play Bo Nix, and so you might wind up with the total of the game. I mean, I haven't looked at the line at all, but so this is just totally off the cuff, so take it with a healthy grain of salt. But I would assume that the market and Vegas, people setting lines would probably set this Broncos and Jets line too low, just based on the tendencies of both teams up to this point, where you get two pretty bad games from Knicks and bad games offensively for the Broncos, and then you get one where there's glimmers of hope, and kind of the same thing for the Jets, where they're really slow, they're not passing a ton up until this last game when Rodgers finally starts to kind of open it up a little bit more, look a little better. I'm wondering if we're seeing both of these offenses begin to ascend a little bit. And then you also, just for the fun narrative aspect of it, this is Aaron Rodgers' first chance. Now the Jets really, really stuck it to the Broncos and Sean Payton last year to try and get some revenge for Nathaniel Hackett, as Sean Payton infamously had some not very nice things to say about Nathaniel Hackett last year. So the Jets already got their revenge, but Aaron Rodgers, who is quite possibly the pettiest quarterback in the league, may feel like he really needs to be heard in this revenge game where he stands.
Well, I think it is interesting, and your note had kind of been where the first two games kind of being average, were they just him shaking off the rust. So it is interesting that he popped for 9.2 adjusted yards per attempt against a pretty good Patriots defense, who had who have that guy Christian Gonzalez. They a good defense. They have a good secondary. So it is interesting that he played so well, and then they also had 40 dropbacks, which in a game where they led throughout the whole game. It didn't ever feel like the game was in doubt, and then to still have 40 dropbacks is kind of like encouraging. Now I don't know how much of that is just the Patriots' ineptitude and just giving up a large play count to the other team. But that is pretty interesting, and that is an interesting game. The only thing I'd say is, so the Broncos, they also have a pretty good defense, right? Where they have a good they have Patrick Surtain. That's a solid defense.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, like, even though Nix is looking better, you mentioned it earlier, what weapons do the Broncos really have? I mean, if you're looking to play this game with a bring back on the Broncos side, like, the only viable option to me is Sutton, really, right? Just because he's getting the majority of the target volume. But, like, you're not going to play a Lil Jordan Humphrey or a Josh Reynolds or, like, I mean, it's encouraging that you're getting a little more Troy Franklin now, but it seems to be at the expense of Mims, where I think we would all love to see a 3 wide receiver set of Sutton, Mims, and Franklin. It seems like that is just not in the cards. But
that is not how they see this team.
No. So I think it's thin for this game to be nuclear, but I see the path is what I'm saying, and I think it might go overlooked.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense for sure. So looking at Troy Franklin, he had a 30% route rate last week. So did Marvin Mims, and then Marvin Mims, he had a 13% target a route rate. Sorry, I should say 30% route rate last week, and then Mims is up from 13% in week 2 and 16% in week 1. So I guess it does feel like those guys are ticking up, that they are seeing a bigger share of the field, but that is like that's true kind of rotational wide receiver level usage, unfortunately.
Yeah. Moving on to there's 2 guys that I think have been.
Okay, sorry. One more thing I want to point out. It looks like that Troy Franklin had a 42% target per run on those routes. So he only had 12 routes, and then he had 5 targets. Well, I guess we're not at the wide receiver section, but that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I did see. I know one of them was just like a real short, like little manufactured screen to him. But
the yardage is not there, unfortunately.
I mean, if you can just get the guy on the field, Bo Nix is his college quarterback. Like, the shower narrative is strong there, and the competition is like, there's no competition. So all you need is, can Troy Franklin play just a little? Because I think really
right.
The only barrier is that you can't catch passes from the bench, and so once he's on the field, I trust Bo Nix to try and get it to him. I mean, who knows? Maybe Peyton will. But the targets per route run is also encouraging, that maybe Peyton is scheming him the ball more when he's on the field. So definitely leaving a light on for the late Broncos, Troy Franklin, Bo Nix stacks. There could be something there, but I did want to move on to a couple guys that we were concerned about on this chart, and that's C.J. Stroud and Trevor Lawrence. I mean, I personally think Lawrence is a little bit more concerning, just because you have his coach already talking about, like, we could see a quarterback change. What? He just gave this guy $55 million a year. It's week 3, and we're talking about benching Trevor Lawrence. Like, that seems really bad to me. But between Stroud and Lawrence, can you talk about those?
Yeah. So Stroud, and I think you kind of hinted on, he has not played the most efficiently. He's at just 7.1 adjusted yards per attempt, but I see honestly a decent amount of positive things here as well, where they're at 1% pass rate over expected. So just a little bit above neutral. So we are actually getting some kind of volume from him. And then the O line looks solid. His time to throw looks solid. So to me, that's something where it's really hard to put your finger on why the efficiency's been so average. But I do think with these kind of pocket passer types that you do get kind of like swings in their efficiency, and so like not panicking on CJ Stroud, and then by extension, still pretty hopeful about pass catchers outside of Nico, and then still pretty hopeful about Tank Dell.
Okay. And then for the Trevor Lawrence stuff, are you hopeful there, or is this? I mean, to me, it's reading like lost season for the Jaguars. Like it seems.
Yeah, it's a true lost season. I think like you still have a lot of the same issues that we kind of noted last week, where like the O line isn't great, the receivers are dropping passes, the coach seems off his prime, and then that manifests itself in bad passing efficiency stats overall. So I think Trevor Lawrence himself as a quarterback is probably at least pretty close to league average starter level. So I think he's probably fine career-wise, but this is a bad Jags team. This is a bad Jaguars team, and then when you're talking about someone who's predominantly, not just solely, but predominantly a pocket passer, that's going to manifest itself in some bad passing efficiency, overall team efficiency. So I know we I have some managed teams with I have one managed team with some of the legendary upside guys where we took Trevor Lawrence as our starter. We took him late, but we're very much panicked about who our starter is going to be the rest of the way. Like we're feeling very uncomfortable with the prospect of starting him.
Yeah, I mean that seems reasonable. All right, I think that's all the guys we needed to touch on the quarterback chart. Unless you had anyone you wanted to mention before we move on to RB.
No. Let's. We are 49 minutes in.
We're one chart down.
We did get some talk in about other positions, but so this is our running back snaps and usage. So kind of focused on who's on the field for the important plays. So on the green bar, that's the percentage of team plays, that is rush attempts to that player. Yellow is percentage of those team plays where they are running a route. And then we have the kind of blocking stats. We don't really care about run blocking, but we want to finish it out. And then pass blocking, it's not fantasy relevant, but it's good to see who's trusted as a pass blocker. Like you can see here, if we didn't have these, you would think, oh, Devin Singletary, he's not actually playing that much. But then you see, actually, no, he's actually pass blocking, pass pro in a lot of his team's dropbacks. And it's great, actually, that they trust him with that. That kind of entrenches him in that role. But that's why he's only at 50% fantasy kind of useful snaps, despite being a clear starter.
Yeah, I mean the Singletary role has been fantastic. In spite of only having about 50% useful snaps, it's been really good. But the guy who has the best role in all of fantasy, just like he did last year, is Kyren Williams. And so, from this point going forward, anything that Sean McVay says to me about like, I really need to lighten the load for this guy, or can't keep Kyren out there for 80% of snaps, 90% of snaps, is just an outright lie, because there's
he's lying to himself as well.
Yeah, there's a difference between what someone tells you and what they show you, and the Rams have shown us like they just love Kyren Williams. Like he
makes their offense go, apparently. Yeah. And actually, no, that not just apparently. He was important for their offense.
Yeah. So Kyren, incredible role. I mean, he's been he was one of the guys I was really aggressively targeting in dog bowls last week. And that worked out pretty well, except I couldn't get him on any of the right teams. Didn't have him with the right combinations, but I think he's underpriced again this week, man. Like, the role is just so good, and I think people are scared off because the offense might be gross, but it's like the offense can be gross. It's just one guy. This guy is the offense, so it doesn't really matter how gross it is. When you get an entire
you have a running back with 90% snap share, and then he's actually good on top of it. That's a pretty potent combination. And third round, late second round was not the correct price.
Like, I like Devin Singletary because of how good his role is, right? And and I think that, his team is just as bad offensively as the Giants are. Like, the Giants are only functional because of Malik Nabers, and even then it's arguable if they're functional or if it's just like Malik Nabers is to the Giants what Kyren Williams is to the Rams. Like, he's what's making the offense go, and Singletary is just getting this incredible role there. Kyron's role is even better, and he is the focal point of the offense, where Singletary is just a complement to Malik Nabers. So Kyren, I mean, unless he's starting to go like top 5, every week in BR drafts, he's underpriced. Like, it's just
right. Agreed.
Okay, we're going to need to have a brief moment of capitulation and a funeral for all the best ball teams that we drafted without Saqoun Barkley, because I don't, and like, while I'm wanting to capitulate because people who were drafting Saqoun Barkley are getting the outcome that was really good for them. And like, it's clear that I don't think that you or I
we need an injury to survive Saqoun Barkley, unfortunately. Like,
yeah.
All of the metrics are good. He's on the field for what 68% of our useful snaps. Oh, sorry, 80%. I'm trying to move on already. 80% snap rate. The his O-line is like playing incredible. That they're the 5th best run blocking rate. And then I was kind of like, the one thing that kind of I was kind of holding on to was that a lot of the time when he got into these one-on-ones, the other player was winning, and I'm like, kind of like, he's not a peak kind of like top peak of his powers, top prime athlete, and that will matter eventually at running back. What kind of forced me to capitulate is, if you look at, he's actually got the second fastest ball carrier speed on the season now, behind just Nico Collins, and granted that's on a 65-yard rushing touchdown, so he should get up there in speed, but the combination of O-line playing incredible and then still pretty solid top end speed, unless you get some kind of wear and tear or injury, it's going to be tough without him, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't think that either of us were saying like this was an impossible outcome for him. We just thought it was probably more thin than it is. I mean, and who knows exactly how thin it was, but I certainly think that we probably underestimated the likelihood of this outcome. I think it was closer to assuming he was going to have to run hot on touchdowns to pay off his tag. And now
he's had some pretty weak years on peripherals, on efficiency.
Right.
And then people say, well, shouldn't you have predicted that him going from the Giants to the Eagles would have this boost in efficiency? But then you see Singletary actually playing relatively efficiently for the Giants too. So it's not like they're like this abysmal, like, can't work offense, where the running back can't do anything. So like there's still some level of meaning to those peripheral stats, but you kind of do have to focus on him looking pretty incredible through the first 3 weeks now.
Yeah, and I have not I haven't checked these stats yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if Singletary's peripherals with the Giants right now are better than Saquon's peripherals when he was with the Giants. You know, he looked Saquon looked, because I always made this comparison of Singletary over the last few years had better peripherals than Saquon over the last few years while he was on the Browns. And so I think it was reasonable to believe that Saquon might just be done, but maybe we were a little too confident that he was done, because he definitely looks like he might be a season-defining player right now.
Right.
So that's all the Saquon crow that we'll be eating. Congratulations if you have him on a lot of teams. I hope it goes well for you. The other guys here that I think were worth mentioning, not a lot of like huge changes to roles, just the notes that I had.
The answer is yes. Singletary is playing better this year for the Giants than Barkley was before.
So here's the real question. If we got Devin Singletary on the Eagles,
oh my God, it'd be unstoppable.
The legendary season of all legendary seasons, probably. Many would say.
Unironically, I think yes. I think Saquon would be like a perfect fit for the Eagles, and it would be unstoppable.
Yeah, I mean, Singletary probably doesn't get to deliver the explosive plays like Saquon does, but man, if you gave Singletary the volume that Saquon's getting in that Eagles offense, like, I think he'd have an extremely high success rate.
He's like not like, I know he doesn't have like true top end speed, but he has a lot of breakaway runs. So like he probably wouldn't get quite as many yardage, but he'd have a lot more of them. Is what I would think.
Yeah. Anyway, that's just still a little bit of Saquon cope for us. The process, the thesis was correct. We just got a bad run out, is what we're telling ourselves.
We just ran bad.
We ran bad. Okay, I want to rapid fire through some of these notes because a lot of these roles didn't change massively, but it's just stuff that I felt like was worth mentioning. Charbonnet is an elite touch consolidator as long as Walker is out. If we get any news at any point this season where the Walker injury is like, oh, this might be something he deals with the whole year, or oh, he's coming back, but we're really going to have to be careful with it. Like, if there's risk of the injury becoming prolonged or him missing even more time, like Charbonnet is an elite touch consolidator. Like, the guy is just getting all of the work. So that's
and it does make me wonder. So if and when Walker comes back, like Charbs might actually have a pretty solid standalone role.
I think he could flip him to be the touch leader on the team and have Walker do what Walker is best at, which is those like home run. Really, what the Seahawks are doing, or what we hope they will be doing, is I want them to recreate Saqoun Barkley in the aggregate with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, where Zach Charbonnet does the bell cow stuff and Kenneth Walker subs in for the big breakaway plays.
So what you're saying is that Charbs will be the plotter, where on all the plays where Saqoun Barkley looks bad, that's Charbonnet. But then the one play where Saqoun gets a breakaway run, that's Kenneth Walker.
Exactly.
Yep. That's. Sorry, I for a second I thought I mixed it up, but I didn't. Sorry, I interrupted rapid fire.
You're fine. I wasn't going rapidly enough, clearly. Okay, Henry finally made it on the starters chart. It's because they were just absolutely pushing the Cowboys' turds in, so he got to run more. His role is the same. No change in the role. It's just, hey, if you're in a positive game script, Henry eats. It's the classic Derrick Henry role, right? Nothing new there. Zach Moss, still really strong role, had a strong performance. Chase Brown, though, finally starting to look a little bit better, got a little bit more work last night. Wondering if this could be a sell high window on Moss if the Chase Brown genie can't go back in the bottle and he makes it more of a true split.
So here's what's interesting about the Zach Moss Chase Brown stuff. It looks like Zach Moss is still getting the majority of the snaps. Like even just last night, he was still at 67% useful snaps between routes and then rush attempts. But for Chase Brown, when he is on the field, it's usually to give him the ball. Brown had 8.1 expected points, despite only having a 20% useful snap share, which I think that to me that's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of reads like maybe they trust Moss to do more of like the pass blocking stuff, just like kind of be out there guy, and Chase Brown is more intentional. Where if Brown is on the field, we want to use this guy. He's more of a weapon. Moss is like the innings eater type guy, and Brown is more of like the all right, let's get this guy the ball. So interesting for sure. Chuba Hubbard's role, looking pretty good as like a really strong kind of stopgap player in managed leagues until you get Brooks in there. Just with the overall ascension of the offense now that the stench of Bryce Young is off of it. And then we can, let's see, I think both of these – oh, no, we've got Jerome Ford on here. Jerome Ford still losing work to Foreman. Both those guys seem entirely dead to me. They're cannibalizing each other. The offense is bad. They're passing a bunch. So that's like the lone bright spot in the Browns offense. But they have a quarterback that can't pass it. So, that's the fly in the ointment there. And then neither of these running backs are good. And so when they both eat into each other's volume, it's just really, really painful. Neither guy at all useful here. And then we can go to the backups here because the last note that I had was Zeke Elliott. It might be over before it even began for Zeke Elliott, Dallas Cowboys reunion tour here, because he's losing work to Dowdle. Dowdle getting more and more work each week. I think Thursday against the Giants is really going to be telling for Zeke. What you need for Zeke to have any kind of sign of life in for any kind of format is he needs to have a spike in his usage here, because if it continues to trend down and Dowdle is trending up, then I think it's really, really bad for Zeke.
Zeke only had a 20% snap share.
Yeah. The Cowboys are doing what they told us in the offseason, what all the beat reporters that I think are the most plugged in Cowboys beat reporters are telling us, which to me, when I first heard it, I kind of interpreted it as, well, let me tell you what they were saying first, and then I'll explain it. So they were saying that they expected the Cowboys to use a full-on committee at running back, and when they said full-on committee, they meant every guy with a running back designation on their team, and even a couple without. They were thinking Dowdle, Zeke, Deuce Vaughn, even Cavante Turpin lining up in the backfield.
Hunter Luepke.
Even Hunter Luepke, their fullback, getting – and I thought, kind of parsing that out was, okay, like these guys will mix in for a carry here and there, but it's mostly going to be the Dowdle and Zeke show, but it's definitely going to be a committee. The beat reporters were spot on. It's literally it's like 5 dudes getting backfield work there. It's pretty gross. I think what you're hoping for fantasy relevance is that Dowdle can I think the only one live to consolidate a useful running back role for the Cowboys is Dowdle, but it's looking much thinner. Thankfully he was
like Rico Dowdle was the top running back last game, but he was still only on the field 45% of the time.
Right.
That translated to 11.6% expected points. So like that's a 0 RB startable week. This, I guess, not quite with the per efficiency, but there's something there for Rico. But this is definitely like when I stopped drafting Zeke, this is kind of what I started envisioning, where like he'd come out the gate with this high touch count, suck, so not score that many points, and then get the ball taken away from him. And I think that's what's happening.
I think that's the correct read here. And I mean, really the funniest part about it is like this is kind of exactly the thesis Pat laid out in his Rico Dowdle article, where it's like, even if you're wrong, it's okay because you're paying for a guy to get you like 8 or 9 points a game in the range that he goes. Right. It's like, and now we're getting it and we're like, this sucks. It's like, well, yeah, that was what was like expected, and we were just hoping to be wrong, and there was a little upside there. I mean, if you want the like silver lining or copium, if you're sitting on a bunch of Rico Dowdle, he's definitely the favorite to consolidate the volume in the backfield. I just don't know how much consolidation there is to be done. Really what you're hoping is the Cowboys offense can improve, which we saw this last year as well. Now it manifested in a different way last year, so this might just be like some shitty pattern matching, but the Cowboys offense wasn't great through the first, I think all the way through their bye. I think it was like all the way through.
Yeah, it took until after their bye, and then they started spamming targets to CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're good again.
They self-scouted and they're like, oh yeah, we got to throw to CeeDee Lamb. This year it feels a little bit more like CeeDee Lamb has been intentionally removed by good defenses. Like they're really
right
on taking him away.
They said, oh, when we stop CeeDee Lamb, this team sucks. Let's do that.
Yeah, and they're right. So you just have to, if you're hoping for something more out of Rico Dowdle, number one is like, well, this is what we should have expected in the first place. But number two is you're just really hoping the Cowboys can figure out something on offense that is not entirely garbage time, because that's all the offense is right now for the Cowboys. It's just garbage time.
Yeah. So last thing that on this chart that was kind of surprising to me was this kind of low usage rate for Braelon Allen. So your eyes do not deceive you. Even looking just at last week, he was on his fantasy useful snap rate was like 26%. And what's kind of interesting, and he still actually produced, so that actually translated to 11 rush attempts and 8 routes. And so he actually got 10 expected points in that game. But I think that was just because of a large play volume count for the Jets. So to me that lends to still, like, I think you have to be really stuck to be starting Braelon Allen. And then in kind of best ball stuff, you either need him to force much more of a committee, and he certainly could. He looks fantastic. Or an injury or something like that, or these kind of like really high play count games for the Jets. So that's something that I wasn't expecting. A takeaway I wasn't expecting coming away from this game after watching it, but I think it is kind of important that he right now in the current split he needs a high play count game for the Jets to be relevant.
Yeah, not particularly useful right now, but just incredible contingent upside.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
I mean, I think we said this last
week. Right, the handcuff. Handcuff.
Top 5 talented running back in the league already, and I'll go to war with anyone on that one. He's extremely good. So the rest of the NFL just fumbled the bag tremendously not drafting this guy. It is so infuriating for him to be stuck on the Jets behind Breece Hall, because it is kind of impossible to usurp Breece Hall, because that guy is also that.
But then Breece Hall let me change this. Last week he was at just 56% useful snap rate with an overall 68% snap rate, which is honestly that's fine. And then 63% useful, 27% on for the 3 weeks. That's fine, but I think if you're paying that top 5 pick, you were certainly hoping for more than that. And that might be disguised by a higher play count as well.
Yeah, I think the snap rate is obfuscating the usage, though, for Breece Hall, which we can go to the next chart and kind of show, because Breece is averaging 16 carries a game, just about, and 7 targets a game. So when you adjust the targets for adjusted opportunities, so you just multiply targets by 2 because they're about twice as valuable as a carry. Breece Hall is getting 30 adjusted opportunities a game. That's insane. There's a reason why he is all the way up here, just about at the 20 expected fantasy points per game line.
I think it's closer to 15 though, on like a normalized Jets snap count, is what I'm saying. Or maybe it's 17. but it's I don't think it's 20. I don't think it's touching 20. If they don't have as many play count as they did.
I mean, I think part of it though is just like in the games where they are more like when it's on the line and they really need to win. I don't think that they're going to take Brees off the field quite as much. But in a game where you're just shellacking the Patriots, like you're very happy to get Braelon Allen looks great. Like if I'm the one who's making personnel decisions for the Jets, I'm very happy to get Braelon Allen in the game, especially when we're in a situation where we're salting it away, but
you're not so I just counted up. They had 70 offensive plays against the Patriots. So are you saying then in a game where it's closer to 50 that those are just coming almost directly from Braelon Allen, where he had 19, he had like 21 of those 70 snaps. Are you saying that it goes to 50 and then it's more like 40 to Brees, just an overall snap count, 10 to Braelon?
Yeah, proportionately, Braelon loses a larger proportion of his snaps than Brees loses his snaps. I think, there's a lot of these coaches where we think that they're not the sharpest tools in the shed. But I do think that, the Jets are aware of like, okay.
Is that correct, though? If you have two incredible talents and like all of these coaches are like, yeah, we want to keep our guys fresh. Like, do you just like, oh yeah, Braelon, you're great. You're riding Pine for most of this game. Well, he is gonna ride Pine for most of the game, but you're only getting 10 snaps. Like we gotta get Brees out there.
Well, I mean, 10 snaps in a 50 play game, like you said, that's a 20% snap rate, which would be consistent with what he got in the last game, right?
And no, I think it was closer to 30.
Okay.
32.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll see how it plays out. All that to say, I'm not terribly concerned about Brees just because he gets so much. Like the guys.
Yeah, I'm not worried about a bad season for him, but I am worried about it being the potential to it being like just a little bit lower, even in a good year, a little bit lower than kind of like the legendary season.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Other guys worth pointing out on this chart, Aaron Jones still being super efficient. Aaron Jones in a good offense, he's looking like a really big win. I think in general, like in the daily and weekly fantasy formats, the market is kind of caught up to the fact that, oh yeah, we should be pricing this guy like he's one of the better running backs in the league. He seems like he's getting pretty reasonably priced. I'm seeing him go like, second round of the dog bowl right now, which feels pretty appropriate. The guys down there, like the really efficient weeks from Derrick Henry and Jonathan Taylor, certainly helping them with the multiple touchdown week from Taylor, and Henry getting the really, really sweet matchup against the Cowboys. But when you look at where they're at on the chart, it's like you got David Montgomery, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, Ramondre Stevenson, Devin Singletary, all kind of clustered together in like a pretty similar expected fantasy point per game range. So I think the biggest difference is you have some crazy ceiling with Taylor and Henry that it's probably a lot harder for the guys like Singletary and Montgomery and Stevenson to get to. But, as far as like your median outcome for those guys, it's just not that exciting for their cost. But their ceiling is fantastic. So in any given week, those guys can go off.
Right. Yeah, I agree for sure. I am kind of getting the vibe of like when people saying it's the year of the running back. It's the year of right now. It's the month of 2 or 3 running backs.
Yeah, I'm becoming substantially less concerned with it being the year of the running back, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I'm concerned it's the year of the Saquon. Like that's
I'm really concerned that it's the year of the Saquon.
That's the spot where I'm like, yeah, this one might actually really hurt me. I mean, if he keeps doing what he's doing right now, which go ahead and flip to the next chart because I want to show Saquon here, and there's another guy on this chart I want to Like if he keeps doing what he's doing here, it's almost a situation where if you have 0% Saqoun, go ahead and take your expected advance rate of 16.667% and don't quite cut it in half, but get close, because those Saqoun teams are advancing, baby. If you're in a pod with a Saqoun team, which every pod has one of those spots is already locked up if he keeps doing what he's doing. So definitely concerning.
I have 0% Saqoun, and pretty close to what you say my expected advance rate should be.
Yeah, not quite half, but getting there.
Yeah.
A guy that I wanted to point out here, DeAndre Swift. You can see him. He's in the 10 to 15 expected fantasy point range. He's just kind of right in the middle of the chart. You can see Zach Charbonnet's big pink bubble. DeAndre Swift with the comically small bubble. Posting, I don't know if I've ever seen this before.
We saw it with Joe Mixon.
The 0% success rate.
Oh, 0% success rate? That's
0%.
Incredible.
Yeah, 0% success rate, which almost makes me think like, man, if I got all of those opportunities. Now, granted, I die after one opportunity on an NFL field,
Yeah, it would be the opportunity to die.
Yeah, I don't get
suicide by NFL.
Like DeAndre Swift to see, but I'm like, I wonder, like if I was invincible and I could just take the 15 opportunities without could I have higher than a 0% success rate? Could I have one run be counted as successful? Maybe, just maybe, is my field.
Right, if you just got regenerated after every carry.
Yeah, I die. It's kind of like the day after tomorrow. You're just dying over and over every play, but you wake up in the backfield and they're snapping it to you. I like to think that my field vision's probably okay enough that I could turn one of those into a successful carry. I die upon being tackled, but, DeAndre Swift, cuttable in all formats, yes?
Yeah. I mean, it...
I've heard people say, oh, don't cut him just yet. He's still getting so much opportunity. Listen, if you're in a managed league, you want your opponents to start DeAndre Swift. I promise you, he just got one of the better matchups he's going to get this year against the Colts, and he turned in a 0% success rate. Get him on your opponent's teams as quick as you possibly can. Just rip the Band-Aid off.
So he scored 6 points. And I mean, I have points where I have teams where I love 6 points.
That's fair. Non-derogatory, that's fair. Another guy who's just had a really bad go of it, looking terrible. Now, the other thing is DeAndre Swift was losing work to Roschon Johnson. Roschon Johnson almost... Yeah,
that is the other piece. Is maybe it's going away. Maybe it's bad now, and it's getting worse.
And I mean, my take on Roschon was always kind of that he was of the Charbonnet mold, where he could be a consolidator because he can do everything. He's a bigger bodied guy. He's not going to wow you on tape, but he looked, I mean, the carries that I saw for Swift versus the carries I saw for Roschon. When I watched Roschon, I was like, I mean, give this guy the ball. It's not super special, but it's way better than the alternative. So in that same vein is Rachaad White, who even his coach is now saying oh yeah, Bucky Irving deserves more work. I mean, Rachaad White just getting completely outclassed as a rusher, but his saving grace is that he is still a very competent receiver. I mean, man, Rachaad White is just not late stage. It's like if you took, Leonard Fournette on his season with the Bucs, where he was he can be out there and get carries and get targets and do none of it well, but it doesn't matter because he's just getting the volume and he'll score touchdowns. That's kind of how Rachaad White is, but not scoring as many touchdowns and surprisingly even worse than Leonard Fournette as a rusher, but a little bit better as a passer. So it's when you Frankenstein all of that together, you still just get something not super appealing.
Right. And the other thing about White was he was an older rookie, because I think it took him a while to figure it out in college. So even though he's only just kind of arrived, he turns 26. It's not that old. It's really not, but it's not young. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of relevant too.
Yeah. A really quick note that I wanted to have on Najee Harris here. It's not efficient. It's not pretty. But Jaylen Warren got pulled from the game because Tomlin said that he didn't look right out there. Goes for an MRI on the knee. No structural damage. So kind of reading the tea leaves there sounds like probably like a minor knee sprain or maybe some bruising or something. But something is not right with Jaylen Warren right now. Maybe compensation injury from the hamstring before the season. But man, as vice president of the Jaylen Warren fan club, I won't take the president role away from Pat. He'd be mad at me. But as vice president of the Jaylen Warren fan club,
I think he'd let you have it now. Actually,
it's not a popular club currently. I'm still holding out hope because he was starting to flip Najee already for work before the injury stuff, and so
right. He was actually a workhorse in the first half, is what I think somebody tweeted that he was a workhorse in the first half, and then they said, "Oh, there's something not right here," so they took him out. And I don't read that too negatively because I maybe I mentioned this too much, maybe I don't mention enough. So I did coach. And one of the things about coaching players is that they will hide and lie to you about injuries because they want to play. And it's part of your job to figure that out when that's happening and to protect them from themselves. So, it's possible that he's like, oh, this guy looks bad now, so I'm not going to play him. But I think it's also pretty likely that after kind of an extended absence, that Warren just wanted to play. He wasn't going to tell anyone, and they're like, okay, we need you healthy, bud. You need to get right.
Yeah, so hopeful that Warren can get right and then deliver down the stretch. Truly could be the comeback of all comebacks for people down tremendously bad right now in their basketball portfolios. The other guy,
including us.
Yeah, that was specifically talking about me. Another guy near Najee on the chart. So it was mentioning all that for Najee because he might see some increased work this week. The whole, if you heard Najee was in a sling after the game, sounds like that's a complete non-issue. Should be good to go. Brian Robinson, another guy who sets up for potential workload increase with Austin Eckler getting the concussion. With a slightly shorter week playing on Monday night. So Brian Robinson in what we highlighted as a potential really high scoring game. And Robinson is competent as a receiver, and they're willing to lean on him as a bell cow without Eckler. I think Robinson could set up as a smash this week. Unfortunately, I've kind of seen people getting privy to that already. I've been trying to push him late in the dog bowls, and I keep getting sniped on him. So I think it might just, if you're watching this live right now and you're playing, underdog battle royales or the dog bowl, this is your call to go, while you're listening to this, fire up a bunch of drafts, grab all the fucking Brian Robinson that you can right now, because the price will rise. The price is going to rise substantially later this week as we get news about the Eckler injury and his availability, and as we get projections out on this extremely high total game.
Right.
Last guy that I wanted to talk about here was Josh Jacobs. I want to start this with the caveat that I'm probably a little biased on Josh Jacobs because I had this conversation with some guys that do the weekly rankings over at Leg Up, and I was kind of poo-pooed that this analysis was maybe incorrect or maybe just me being a hater. But Jacobs looked pretty bad to me. Emmanuel Wilson looked like the better runner, and I didn't think it was close. If it was maybe it was just I thought it was going away. If you just take the nameplates away and you watch these two guys, you'd be like, yeah, that guy is the way better running back. I don't know who the other guy is, but I don't know why they have him on the field.
We caveat, we are haters.
We're
let's read out some numbers. So Josh Jacobs fantasy points over expected last week, -7.8. Emmanuel Wilson fantasy points over expected, +7.6. I'm guessing that's what you saw. on Sunday.
Yeah, it was also Jacobs had a pretty poor success rate. I believe it was 31%, not ideal. Bad rush yards over expected, which is
and 39% on the year too. So it's not like that's some outlier.
And 39% though is reasonable. Like 40% is kind of the threshold for like, okay, good. And also like you're playing with Malik Willis as your quarterback, so like maybe they're able to.
It's Kenneth Walker-esque because Kenneth Walker is 38.9 on the year.
Yeah. So I mean, I got.
When you're a plotter, it's not good enough. You need to be a home run hitter, to be at 40%. I think.
Yeah, let me. I'm going to recite some of the bull case that was given to me by the Josh Jacobs defenders. But Jacobs better in rush yards over expected per attempt on the year, on more volume than Wilson. Had a higher rate of 15+ mile per hour runs. I don't think that's relevant at all, especially with
not on the sample size.
Sample for Wilson. Yeah, you're literally just asking like how many long runs did the guy get. That doesn't move the needle for me at all. But Jacobs with a higher PFF rush grade, a higher breakaway rate. Again, breakaway rate on the sample for Wilson, I don't think is going to be too sticky there. Jacobs also saw a higher rate of stacked boxes. But yeah, so there was some pushback to my Josh Jacobs hating. I will just say I'm trying to get ahead of this. I think that I would not be surprised at all if over the next few weeks we see Jacobs kind of trend away, especially after you get Jordan Love back, have this turn into the more typical LaFleur pure split backfield. I
have to say that's incredible cope of like, oh well, he's not playing that well, but his rush yards over expected per attempt is slightly better than Emmanuel Wilson. Like that's not great.
And I mean, there's no way you'll be able to guess who this was from because it came from legendary player hater himself, Sam Sherman, who I thought would surely be on my side, hating Josh Jacobs, but I think it might be all the time he spends with Hayden Winks. Has Josh Jacobs pilled him? So his judgment may be clouded here.
I kind of think like that's not enough of like, oh, they're gonna bench Josh Jacobs. I don't.
No. That's not
what you're saying. Like, hey, this is a committee, and it might become closer to 50-50.
That's all that I'm saying. I'm not saying Josh.
I think that feels pretty reasonable.
It's just that LaFleur wants that too. Like that's all. This is the guy who like didn't play Derrick Henry when he had him. He was keeping Derrick Henry in like a true timeshare. So I think that it's not unreasonable to say that Jacobs doesn't look incredible. Wilson is at the very least comparable to him and like arguably looks better, but could go either way. I just think we might see this usage for Jacobs start to trickle off a little bit. And I think the extremely high carry count from week 2 was more of just a side effect of like, oh God, it's our first game without Jordan Love. Like,
I mean, that's game plan stuff.
Yeah, they built the plane around Josh Jacobs week 2, and so that's the one I want to.
I'd bet a higher proportion of Josh Jacobs' carries came against the Colts, which is going to boost up stuff like his rush yards over expected per attempt.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, that was my Josh Jacobs hating. Needed to get that off my chest just so that in a couple weeks when it's aging well, I can victory lap and say that I told you so.
Right.
Like
just tune into our 1 hour in and 30 minutes into Stat Chasing, and it's right there.
Yeah, clear as day. We'll move on here because we're kind of languishing on these charts. But let me hit you with a couple quick questions for rest of season. Who would you rather have here? We'll just go with guys that are very similar in their expected fantasy points on this chart.
Okay.
Josh Jacobs or Brian Robinson?
Brian Robinson, probably.
Josh Jacobs or James Cook?
Or who?
James Cook.
James Cook was 0. Probably James Cook.
And then the other ones that are here, like I'm clearly Josh Jacobs over Najee Harris. I'm clearly Bijan Robinson over Josh Jacobs. Let's just pretend that we heard today that Kenneth Walker has fully recovered, but has decided to take some time away to spend time with his family for the rest of the season.
He's moving to Hawaii.
Yes.
That feels like Charbonnet as well. Like I feel very comfortable about those guys as their current workload, but I feel pretty uncomfortable with Josh Jacobs. Now, have to caveat that we are haters.
We're haters.
However, some of it seems bad. Some of it does seem bad.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the tight end chart, and while we do that, we can just caveat this with we're just haters for his fantasy production in the silly imaginary made up game.
Oh yeah. We hope he has a wonderful life.
Yeah. I would love it if Josh Jacobs performs really well, and he absolutely would stuff both of us into lockers. Like there's no doubt.
Oh yeah, he would beat us up for sure.
Yeah. And he absolutely has that dog in him. So nothing negative to say about Josh Jacobs the person, just for fantasy football.
Yeah. That's your cue to me to move on to the next chart, right?
Yes. So we're on the tight end chart now.
So it's kind of interesting. This is not too far off where we would have expected Tyler Conklin, where we would have expected K. Dotton. This is pretty much straight down the fairway for how you would have projected him. Very high usage rates, but it not really mattering for fantasy football.
Yeah, Conklin is one where, like, in a managed league, if you're just, like, trying to throw someone out there that's not going to goose you, Conklin seems okay.
Yeah.
Granted, he's still going to goose you some weeks, but, like, goose you less than other guys. Just because he's out there so much, and the Jets are kind of devoid of now I say Jets are devoid of target competition, but Tyler Conklin is still only earning 10% targets per route run, so it's not great. But
this is what you paid for. You're getting what you paid for. You when you draft Tyler Conklin, you're drafting floor. You're getting floor.
Now, speaking of floor, the other guy who's been kind of sneaky consistent, just like regular 4 targets a week, sign him up, 4 targets, 4 catches, not going to goose you. Pat Freiermuth, pretty sneaky, 18% targets per route run, really low ADOT.
You're getting less, marginally less than you paid for, but more than me and you would have projected at the start of the year, right?
Yes, and
you still overpaid, but not by as much as we thought.
And in the current tight end landscape, where like everyone going earlier is just failing, it kind of seems like even Pat Freiermuth might even be a win, even though he's a loss. He could be a win because it's one less spot on your roster that you spent on a different tight end, and there's so many that are bad. But the one of the lone bright spots, there's really only a couple bright spots, I would say, at tight end this season. And we talked about a couple of them last week with Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, both of whom still look like bright spots. The Brock Bowers, bad game. I'm not willing to.
So Brock Bowers is still tight end 2 on the year.
Yeah.
And it's only Dallas Goedert who's ahead of him.
Yeah, Goddard showing that when the Eagles have no other weapons and they're forced to rely on Dallas Goedert, he can have a monster game. He's definitely
he can deliver.
He's interesting for these next couple weeks while you're missing Devonta and A.J. Brown. Although it might just be one of those situations where it's when a defense knows going into the game, all we have to do is take away Saqoun and Dallas Goedert, and then they're forced to throw to. I mean, not even Britton Covey. Britton Covey's injured too. I don't know if you saw that. So, like, you're doing what, like Jauan Jennings? So it seems.
Yeah, it's still unclear what AJ Brown's timeline is. So maybe he's back.
The speculation I've heard is that it's likely that these injuries right now, the Brown and the Devonta one, are going to be something that they just try to push through the bye because they have a week 5 bye. And it's hey, let's not go out
right.
Thing.
We give up. We not necessarily sacrifice this game, but you guys rest. We get a 2-for-1 basically.
Yeah. The bright spot I wanted to highlight though, other than the guys that we talked about last week, is Jake Ferguson. And you alluded to this earlier, Drico, where you said the Cowboys have this offense just bereft of talent outside of CeeDee Lamb. And so, the next most talented guy here of Jake Ferguson is getting an elite 26% targets per route run, really strong 9.7 ADOT. And I mean, God, it's so frustrating to me because I was so strong on Ferguson early, and then all the slappies were on Ferguson, and I let myself get talked out of it by people who said, "Oh, he's not that talented. He wasn't even a target earner last year with no competition." And I let myself get talked out of it when I thought he was set up for a really strong season again. So just kicking myself a little bit there.
We're looking at absolutely gross volume here, though, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like it's a bad team who their defense is bad, or their defense has been bad, so they've had to, because these are kind of like descriptive. They've had to throw a lot, and then that and him being the number 2 in offense per after talent has meant that he's been a big beneficiary.
Yeah, I mean, and really, what you're, to think through, like, what's the fragility like here for Jake Ferguson rest of season? The way that this goes away for you, that he's not the smash of all smashes this year, is the Cowboys defense gets a lot better, or some other weapon emerges on offense that's like able to out-earn him for targets. But I mean, the volume has been so high.
Or the defense keys in on him, and he's not talented enough to like overcome that attention.
Yeah, I mean, I guess then you're, because they're just dedicating 2 guys to CD and 2 guys to Ferguson every play. Like, you'd hope the Cowboys offense is able to get something going there with, you're getting Brandon Cooks single coverage and Jalen Tolbert single coverage. Like, they can't be that. Well, I don't want to say that. I was going to say they can't be that bad, but I think they can.
Yeah. It's interesting, and NFL seasons, they do evolve.
Yes.
But it looks very strong for Jake Ferguson right now.
Let's a quick run through. We talked about a bunch of these guys the last 2 weeks, but the theme is continuing. Guys that we are still very worried about here. I just want your opinion on it here. I'm just going to hit you with a couple of them. Sam Laporta.
Well, I'm still not worried about him. He's injured, so he's not going to play. But I still think like he's important enough, and that they need touchdowns, and he's somebody who can get that for them. I still think that there'll be long stretches where he's a big scorer. I'm still holding out hope.
Mark Andrews.
Oh my God! The thesis is just dead. It's absolutely dead. Like, I know there's a cope of like, well, they didn't feature him much in their game plan because this is a run-heavy week, and they didn't want to use him like that. That is just not what you thought you were drafting. Like, we understood that the Ravens would have these run-heavy games like that. I think that's kind of understood. But the idea that was like, oh well, you know what, Mark Andrews, you're good this week. Like, we don't need you. Like, in my head, Mark Andrews was like one of the best players in the NFL, and like absolutely essential to his team, and that is just so far from the truth.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I mean, we've seen this now with 2 guys, so sample size of 2, but Tony Pollard and Mark Andrews, both the year right after tightrope surgery, seemingly becoming just like a shell of themselves. I'm wondering if the tightrope surgery thing.
So some of the injury guys, they've been talking about it, and they've said that overall, over the larger sample size of the data, that it's not really a thing. Just for example, Brock Bowers, he had tightrope surgery, and he looks fantastic. And I guess maybe it's a risk factor. It's where like either it's like this binary 95% completely the same, 5% worst season of their lives.
Yeah. So the anyway, the Andrews stuff looks really bad. I mean, I'd like to hold out.
Somebody noted, and I'm sure other people will think this. I thought it myself as I was saying it. Brock is younger. Understood. Mark Andrews he is only 28, but the PT guys who look at this data, they've said overall over large sample size, it's usually not an issue. Brock Bowers was just like an example. I don't have any other off the top of my head, unfortunately, but I do think it's important that the overall sample says it's usually not a problem, but these are some high profile big stinkers that we should think about going forward.
Yeah. So here's the next one, Travis Kelce.
Yeah, you have to be worried. He's another guy where he's just clearly no longer essential. Yeah, he's just not really essential to his team anymore, is he?
I kind of think that maybe what we saw last year with now I think a big part of the way last year
he's
ran
been
out.
Healthy though.
Right. I'm saying last year was the injury, but I think it also might have been maybe he was, healthier towards the end of the season, and then what we saw in the playoffs might have just been like the one last hurrah for a guy who's, he's physically past his prime, but he can get up and give it his all, for just a couple short weeks. He can really lay it all on the line. And it's frustrating because that's the thesis that we heard all offseason for people for why they were fading Travis Kelce of, they're going to rest him and he's not going to be used as much until the playoff when the game's really
he's got an 85% route rate. So they're playing this guy like he's playing, but when he's out there, he's not earning targets at the same rate he used to.
Yeah, I mean, it might just be the ascension of Rashee Rice. Like maybe Kelce is fine. It's just that Rashee is just that much better. Like if you know, I mean, think of
they need guys too. Like they're kind of limited outside of Rashee, so they do need somebody else. Like I'm just like I'm having a really tough time. I posted something in the Discord that his ass stats, which is something to do with separation, were really strong. But then I said I followed up. I just wanted an excuse to reference his ass.
Okay, next guy we're worried about still, Kyle Pitts.
Kyle Pitts, yeah, I think we're definitely still worried about Kyle Pitts. So I remember, I think it was Sam who kind of noted that on the first drive he didn't play a lot of snaps. So last week he was at an 81% route share. He's on an 84% route share for the season. That's still top 5 for tight ends. But the target per route, and then actually some of this last week he had a 20% target per route run, and then a 17 ADOT. And then it's 14% over the 14% targets per run over the full season, and then 11 ADOT. That's a little more encouraging, right? As
I mean, yeah.
As Kirk Cousins can kind of pick this back, if the last game for them is any indication, that feels better. That feels better than the vibes indicate.
Yeah, I mean, the problem for me is that when you look at the target competition around him, it's pretty concerning that Ray McLeod and Darnell Mooney, if it was
important elements of the offense,
right?
When we thought they were average
really,
guys.
A lot of his production came on that one long pass. So, and I mean, that's to transition that into the next guy of Dalton Kincaid. Same thing for Kincaid. Like Kincaid and Pitts basically had the same week. They had one big play, and then the rest of it was shit. And so it's like, man, really the thing that you're hoping for with these elite tight ends, what these guys can do that the rest of the position can't do, is that in general, historically, they were able to earn this volume where they'd have this decent production that might not have been special on a game-to-game basis, but in any single game, they had this great volume. And then also you could tack on these big plays like Kyle Pitts and Dalton Kincaid had. But for these guys, we're getting not a lot of volume. Not
right.
I mean, Kincaid
versus the price you paid.
Right.
Is it's concerning. But I think the vibes are closer to, if you've got this guy in tight end premium, you can't even start him.
No, and that's not the case. Like Dalton Kincaid, I came away this week feeling a little more bullish on him. Not just because of the long play, but because it looked like what they were trying to do in week 2 before it kind of got derailed with him getting checked out for concussion protocol. It seems like that is more along the lines of what they want to do. The problem, again, is this is just an offense that is not going to have a super high pass rate. They'd rather run the ball. Josh Allen is going to eat up a bunch of the touchdown equity.
So some of the statistics and I'm sorry to disagree again. Some of the statistics for Dalton Kincaid here are kind of interesting. So Dalton Kincaid last night had a 29% targets per run, 12 ADOT. His issue last week was that he had just a 49% route share, and then coming off so no injury actually. I was still thinking about the concussion and maybe that factored, but do you think maybe the low route share was just because they won on this big huge route, or is that maybe because I guess I'm just looking at a single game split here, and then his route share for the season is just 67%, and I think we expect that to be higher. Targets per run 18%. That feels pretty I guess it's not spectacular, but I wouldn't be surprised if he finished the year somewhere between 20 and 25% on target per run, and then 80 to 85% on route percentage.
Yeah, that was why I was saying I came away more encouraged from this last game for Dalton Kincaid. But
I interrupted you and then said I was disagreeing with you, and actually, it sounds like we actually completely disagree. So I apologize for my interruption.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I came away feeling better about Kincaid. I definitely think that, like many of the elite tight ends, it's a loss at cost. Like it's a negative advance rate player. But I don't think he's not dead and buried like Mark Andrews feels. I think the other problem with Dalton
No.
is Khalil Shakir's the better receiver on the team, like pretty clearly to me. I just don't think that we're getting the true ceiling outcome for Dalton Kincaid of like the special talent will be the number one passing option on the team. That is just
they need the offense needs to work through Dalton Kincaid.
Yeah,
it is not being true.
Is dead and gone, just like the Mark Andrews thesis is dead and gone. The unfortunate part with Mark Andrews is he seems like he might be entirely unusable. Dalton Kincaid seems like he will still be usable. He just seems like not worth what you paid for him. Basically, the answer to tight end this season just seems like Trey McBride, George Kittle, Jake Ferguson, Brock Bowers, or just don't take any tight end and just take whoever you got forced to auto draft in round 18 when the platform realized you had no tight ends, so you just skip the position entirely because it's been atrocious.
It's been rough, all right. It has been rough. And then, speaking of it being a little bit rough, so after we, in our kind of circle, kind of crowned Brock Bowers as the tight end one, last week he had just 56% route share, and then 16% target per run, 5.5% ADOT. Now, I think that is an indictment of the coaching staff. They fucked up, and they need to fix that. Not for me, but for them. But it does kind of underline some of the risks here with Bowers after a pretty phenomenal week.
Yeah, it might just be a throw the game in the trash game for the Raiders because it was really bad all the way around.
Right.
There. They're talking about quarterback changes already, right? So it might just be a throw out the box score kind of game. But I agree with you. It definitely it's highlighting the concerns that we had pre-draft about Brock Bowers of maybe because they have Mayer, they don't use him as much as we hope that they should.
You mean post-draft?
Or excuse me, yeah, post NFL draft. But anyway, I'm not.
I guess on a down game for him, he had 8.6 points on FFBC, and 7.1 in PPR. For tight ends, given that he was like the pretty affordable, that's like that's not a crusher by any means. So if this is a down game for Bowers, like you're feeling pretty good about an 8.6 floor in tight end premium.
Yeah, the next guys I wanted to talk about are on the next chart. If we want to go to that one, Cole Kmet finally found his way onto the field. Shane Waldron realized that it was a little bit silly to use Gerald Everett over him, and Cole Kmet looked great. Looked like the reason why he was one of my most drafted tight ends before.
So back up to 73% route share last week, and then a 27% targets per route run, and they needed them. So like that was pretty big, and pretty encouraging to see that kind of usage. And now, I think, I guess the question is, do we think that that should be the projected route share from like week 4 on?
I think it's going to. I think as far as the tight end splits are concerned, like Kmet relative to Everett, I'm hoping that they learned their lesson there, and they're
right.
Okay, we get it. This is the better player. But what I'm worried about is that the targets might not be there when Keenan Allen comes back.
Right, they won't be. They won't. There's no way. And the dropbacks probably won't be there as well. So this is probably like pretty close to a true ceiling game for Kmet. But we were the price that we were paying was kind of like factoring in some dud games with the hopes that we would get these kind of ceiling games. So we're pretty pleased that this is firmly in his range of outcomes now.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest takeaway here is probably not even anything that's going to be that fantasy relevant this season, unless we get, like, if you're playing single week stuff, you're playing DFS or like underdog battle royales, and there are more situations where the Bears are in a script where they're going to get to run a lot of plays and have to pass a lot, and they're missing a weapon, like missing a DJ Moore or a Keenan Allen, someone who's going to command a lot of targets, where Cole Kmet could step in to fill the void. That feels really valuable to me, potentially, as like a good spot where maybe
Captain Cole Kmet.
Yes.
Captain Cole.
And then the other thing is that, like, in the future, in next year's drafts down the road, Cole Kmet seems like a sneaky, like, could be one of these guys that we see emerge later in his career as like this is an elite tight end now. He
feels a little bit similar to a Devin Singletary to me, in that it goes into the year and they're like, oh, we want to use all these guys, and then as the year goes on, it's like, no, this is the best one, we have to play him.
Yeah, so I'm hopeful that maybe next year is the year of the elite Cole Kmet tight end season. Seems hard this year without an injury to someone, but at least
right. They signed him to a long contract, and as Caleb Williams develops, hopefully we get a new coaching staff. That could be really encouraging. So it's actually a dynasty trade for
yes.
If you're somehow a dynasty guy and listening to this podcast, trade for Cole Kmet.
Yeah. Okay, let's get through this chart real quick. I just had 2 more notes. Are we done with the Isaiah Likely experiment?
Yeah. I mean, you're still very happy if you drafted him, but you're very displeased if you bought him on the post Thursday night main event price when people were doing the 2-3 turn. That was bad.
That was bad. How could we have foreseen that was man who drafted Mark Andrews as one of his most drafted tight ends makes fun of people paying up for Isaiah Likely. It's a little ironic here, but talking about myself. Okay, last note on this chart. Actually, there's 2. Jauan Johnson, alleged or apparently being eased back in. They mentioned that he's kind of on a snap count as he works back from the foot injury. So maybe we can leave a light on there for Jauan Johnson, who was a late round tight end darling for many in our circle. no other real comment there. Just wanted to mention that I've seen
So
that.
I do. Dwayne McFarland pointed out one of the issues with tight end this year, that there's a split between who plays in 11 personnel and 12 personnel that's been larger than before. And the Saints could be part of that trend where Jauan Johnson is the 11 personnel guy, and then they use different guys in 12. But maybe that is part of easing him back in from the injury, that they actually don't want to play him in 12. But as he feels better, they will.
Yeah. The other one that I wanted to talk about is Eric All.
Yeah. I had that listed in my notes as well. But you go ahead. You start us off.
Man, the Bengals seem to really like this guy. I had a note for myself playing the showdown slate that I wanted to bump up the Eric All projection and kind of like fudge the Gesicki projection down a little bit. And Gesicki still was involved, was the thing. I mean, look at the targets per route run for the Bengals tight ends. I think this is just a side effect of them missing T. Higgins and not having, very much in the way of wide receivers. So just using the tight end as kind of that pass catching option instead. But it's looking like a true committee right now between Gesicki and All. So that's the hard part, is for either of these guys.
So even last night, you're looking at 54% route share for Gesicki, 24% route share for Eric All. That I think that's exactly what you said, where it's a committee. Like, none of these guys are getting, like, apart from Showdown, and like, I don't even think you could draft if you knew that this was if you knew that this was what we were getting. I don't think you take either of these guys. I don't think you draft either of these guys in tight end premium at all.
Really, I would like if we were redoing an FFPC 20-round draft right now. I think we would be scrambling to take both of them late. Like, I'm not saying to take them early, but like, dude, we were drafting guys like Michael Mayer and like Gerald Everett. Like, we absolutely would be drafting Mike Gesicki and Eric All.
There was that, like, there was some chance that it could be higher. If you knew you were just locked into a 50% route share, without upside, I don't think you can play these guys at all. Like, and one of them will have to hit a much higher percent route share to like hit your lineup in a real way, other than like just a random touchdown.
No, you're right. In managed league,
like Eric, 54% for Gesicki, even with a 23% route share is that's pretty, to me, that's pretty rough.
Yeah, I mean, I think in best ball, like, there's some argument to be made for having one or either of these guys.
Oh no.
Uh-oh, can you hear me?
I'm having some audio issues.
Okay. But yeah, just to kind of put a bow on tight end, they're interesting. It's kind of like they have really limited standalone value, but probably some decent contingent value. So yeah, that's where I kind of fall on the Bengals tight end situation. Definitely a little interesting in DFS or like weekly formats on slates where you're either doing like a punt tight end thing or like in the primetime Palooza stuff for Underdog. I was taking some Eric All, and yes, Draco,
that's not good.
I can hear you now, but I don't know if you can hear me. All right, hang on. We have a little technical difficulty here. Sorry for the dead airwaves, guys. We're just trying to work through this. Try to get to the next chart here for wide receivers, and I can kind of begin walking us through it. Let's see, any other tight end stuff I can mention here while Drico gets us squared away. Yeah, I mean, not really. No one on this page is anyone that you really want to be starting at all. I mean, the Bengals situation is just the most interesting because you have a little bit of contingent upside there if either one of those guys could consolidate. I think there's a really small path to Eric All just like being the better guy and ending up like winning the job from Gesicki, but I think it's pretty thin. I think they'll probably just end up using them both. So that's the painful part. Still waiting. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Drico's gotten us over to the wide receiver chart here. This first wide receiver chart is for wide receivers that are running between 85 and 100% of the routes. So these are the true like every down type starters. Our x-axis is our weighted targets per route run. So it's targets per route run, but with a weighting to account for target depth. So if you're just getting a bunch of little dink and dunk stuff, you're going to have a lower weighted targets per route run than guys that are getting targeted down the field. And then on our y-axis is their fantasy points per game that they've scored so far. So the x-axis going to be a little bit more of what tells us like guys that we can be looking out for, potentially for some positive regression if they're really high or negative regression if they're low there. And then the y-axis is just describing what they've done for us lately. So, I mean, the first one that stands out is the overall wide receiver one in the top right-hand corner, Malik Nabers, just with an absolutely absurd target share. I mean, over 80% weighted targets per route run is insane, averaging 22.5 fantasy points per game. He looks like the absolute truth. I have to shout out something Gretsch put in Stealing Signals, but he was talking about the incredible touchdown catch that Nabers had in the corner of the end zone, where he like stopped on a dime, turned, spun around, caught the ball, and then managed to get both feet down. And he said something along the lines of, is it possible that Daniel Jones didn't actually throw that ball off target, but he was instead intentionally throwing it somewhere that only Spider-Man could catch it? I just thought that was a great way to describe the superhero level of effort and execution that Malik Nabers had. I mean, this guy looks so good. The only thing that really can slow Nabers down, I think, is the fact that it's kind of a one-man band there. And so you're going to get some teams that really focus on taking him away. But I mean, he's a locked in every single week starter. You literally never bench this guy going forward. He seems elite. Other guys that I wanted to talk about on this chart, Malik Nabers' draft classmate, Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, I think this is the week for Marvin Harrison to kind of string together another really good game. He had the quiet week 1 where everyone was calling him too slow and a bust. Then he erupts in week 2, gets a good amount of targets here in week 3. But I think week 4, where you get the great matchup with the Commanders and, just a really friendly game environment. Also, you're very likely missing McBride with the concussion. Like, I've been aggressively drafting Marvin Harrison in the dog bowl. He's a guy I've been taking ahead of ADP every time. He's one that I think should perform very well this week. I think he'll be joining Nabers a little farther up and to the right on this chart next week. A guy that I wanted to talk about and I think this is like more of a broad meta discussion rather than like a specific player. But I think it's useful, especially in the context of this player as well, is Chris Godwin. So he's been really, really effective so far, scoring a touchdown in, I believe, every game so far. Just incredible usage to 60% weighted targets per route run. The problem is like Chris Godwin's not going to score a touchdown in every single game, and he does have really strong target competition in Mike Evans. So I've heard really good analysis on the fact that this is a really opportune sell high window for Chris Godwin, which I certainly agree with. But I don't think he is going to plummet back down to earth like some people think. I think that kind of the mean for Chris Godwin this season might be something that we're observing just for players of this archetype in general. And that's these wide receivers who are like these more possession receivers that are running lots of routes out of the slot and are really matching up well against the defenses that have become popular in the NFL so far. And so we're seeing this with guys like Chris Godwin. We're seeing it with guys like Rashee Rice. And I would argue that if Cooper Kupp, we would be seeing it with Cooper Kupp as well. Really, it's just these guys that are these possession receivers in the slot. I mean, we've kind of always seen it with Amon-Ra, but I mean, he kind of came into his own during a meta in the NFL where it's been more similar to what we're seeing this year, where this year just feels like an even more extreme version of what we've seen in years past. So I think this might be kind of a combination of, yes, it could be a little bit of a sell high window on Godwin, but it's not a sell at all costs. I think this might just be more signal of what we might be seeing that's effective against defenses in the NFL so far. I'm gonna just try and power through these because with Drico's technical difficulty, I don't think anyone wants to hear me ramble incessantly for super long. So I'm just going to go through some of these main points I've got on the chart. Garrett Wilson, we talked about this earlier, could potentially be a get right spot as we see the Jets play volume increase. Might have been a side effect of the Patriots, but I do think that this spot against the Broncos might be better than people would believe with how strong the Broncos defense has been. I think that, we heard Aaron Rodgers say something to the effect of he and Garrett Wilson need to get on the same page. And I've seen lots of really good analysis about Garrett Wilson just, making some lazy mistakes, not getting his feet down, just doing not properly, in being in motion and turning it upfield before the ball is snapped, getting a careless penalty, stuff like that. And I think Garrett Wilson's a talented enough receiver that if he and Rodgers can get on the same page, we might get one of these absolute eruption games. And I think I'd rather be early than late to that. So I'm going to attack this aggressively as a spot to play Garrett Wilson this week. The other notes I had on this chart, okay, so we got the huge monster week from Jauan Jennings last week. Brandon Ayuk sitting down here in the win sprinter quadrant next to guys like Demarcus Robinson and Romeo Doubs. I think it's got to be time they get Brandon Ayuk involved. He had a good number of targets last week. I just think that this offense is in desperate need of someone to stand up and make some plays for them. You could get Kittle back this week, but if Kittle and Debo are both out, I think it's a really good spot for Ayuk just to get peppered with volume. Quentin Johnston, is he for real or not for real? The Quentin Johnston position on this chart is actually a mirage. It's the fantasy points are purely coming from just crazy touchdown volatility. He's been okay. He's definitely been better than I thought he would be. I thought he was just an unmitigated disaster. He's been okay in an offense almost entirely devoid of target competition, but he's kind of masking the Ladd McConkey breakout that's happening before our eyes. Ladd leading the team in targets per route run, looking like a really strong profile. Definitely a buy opportunity on Ladd, where he's kind of masked by the Quentin Johnston touchdown efficiency. If Herbert misses the game, which he's got that injury he's dealing with, you could still have like an extended buy window on Ladd McConkey, but I'm definitely selling this Quentin Johnston performance so far. Chris Olave kind of talked about the Saints as maybe misleading us with their overall volume that we expected from them, with the first two games being blowouts. We thought they might be, just this really fast-paced, efficient offense with their play action rates in pre-snap motion. Turns out they might just be a run-heavy offense that can be efficient. More along the lines, think like Ryan Tannehill, Tennessee Titans, right? Like really efficient, run-heavy, play-action type team. So I'm not super worried about Chris Olave, but I'm also less bullish on him this week than I was last week, which is weird because he had his best game so far this season this last week, finally getting in the end zone and putting up a little over 80 yards. But I just think you might be seeing like a lower volume offense, which might not be as exciting for Olave. So not panicking, but also like kind of stemming some of the bullishness that I felt towards him. Let's see. I think that we may be good to move on to the next chart. So I will let Draco know here. He's so good. So this chart, I mean, we see Rashee Rice, absolutely elite role. Incredible weighted targets per route run, up at the top with other elite receiver Jauan Jennings, of course. Obviously, I think the Jauan Jennings stuff is more of just like that 1 week blip on the radar, out of absolute necessity. Although I don't want to take anything away from Jauan Jennings. By the way, if you didn't watch this game, go back and watch the game. The Jauan Jennings performance is way more impressive than the box score, which you have to be thinking, how is that possible? He scored 50 fantasy points. The guy went insane. The reason it's more impressive is there were multiple throws that were, for all intents and purposes, interceptions that Jauan Jennings just decided, no, it's not an interception. It's a Jauan Jennings reception. And it was incredible. There was a really awful pass that should have been, I mean, the 49ers did manage to lose this game. They definitely should have lost it earlier than they did. There was a really bad turnover-worthy play where Jauan Jennings just absolutely mosses a guy and saves the game. I mean, I thought that was the game-saving play by him. Turns out the 49ers were beyond saving. This could be a really interesting spot against the Patriots where the 49ers are in desperation mode. They need to win a game. Let's see here. Other notes that I had on this chart. Jayden Reed, incredible buying opportunity. One of the best receivers in the NFL. You can just take that to the bank. It's just getting masked by the Malik Willis stuff right now. If you get it, by the way, Jayden Reed, like incredible underdog pick right now. The ADP on him could be extraordinarily volatile if you get a Jordan Love is cleared to play notice, and then you're going to get projections come out later in the week. Jayden Reed just seems like one of the best receivers in the game. Just like we can just full stop that. He's very good, extremely dynamic. I mean, it feels weird to compare him to Debo because to me he's like a little bit like Debo will straight run through a guy's face. He's like got a little bit more running back to him than Jayden Reed does. But Jayden Reed is just as dynamic with the ball in his hand as anyone in the league. He's incredible to watch. Super exciting player. If you're in a managed league with trading, like a home league, buy the shit out of Jayden Reed right now. Other guys on this chart that we were looking at. I mentioned Ladd McConkey already. You can see the incredible weighted targets per route run there. That's what we're looking for. 70% weighted targets per route run, but not popping yet on the fantasy points per game. This is like a clear get ahead of the trend on Ladd McConkey. We talked about Deontay Johnson earlier in the context of Andy Dalton. Think we're in a really good spot for Deontay Johnson. Incredible weighted targets per route run. Probably will see his fantasy points per game come up too, I would assume, with the Thielen injury. So really like Deontay here. Shaheed still getting great weighted targets per route run. Like Draco said, just didn't connect this week, so it's fine. I mentioned Khalil Shakir is the best receiver on the Bills. Think it's pretty clear. He's the best receiver on the Bills. The frustrating thing is I've been a big Khalil Shakir bull for multiple years, and the Bills just refuse to use him. He looks like the best one now, but they're still doing this annoying committee thing where they really are spreading it out and not concentrating the targets. Going to be tough for fantasy. Going to be not super pretty. Hard to start any of these guys in a managed league. You can only start. The only reason you could start Dalton Kincaid is because of the tight end designation. If he was a wide receiver, he's obviously unstartable. So you're just in a situation where it's a low volume passing offense. It's kind of spread around. Shakir's the best pass catcher, closely followed by Kincaid. You guys know I'm a Kincaid hater, but I do want to I want to provide good analysis, and my Kincaid outlook is definitely more bullish after this last week than it was earlier this season. I still think he sucks. So. Brian Thomas might be the lone bright spot on the Jaguars, but it also might not matter because the Jaguars are atrocious. All right, we can go on to the next chart here. We'll wrap it up. Let's see. Last chart here.
I think I'm back just for the end.
Wow, Drico coming in clutch for the most important chart of the night. I'll throw.
I couldn't miss the 40 to 7% route run receiver chart.
I'll throw it over to you for Xavier Legette. We had talked about increasing bullishness for Panthers weapons. What are your thoughts on Legette going forward?
So, yeah, you have the Andy Dalton. I'm still having some issue. So yeah, you have the Andy Dalton, him providing some stability for the offense going forward, and then you also have the injury to Adam Thielen. I don't think he's it's like a 1-for-1. I think that they are very different players, but that's definitely pretty it's a clear catalyst for him to play more routes. And
after Thielen went out,
and it seems like he is playing well. If he can keep playing well, increase his routes, and then maybe get some better quarterback play, that does seem like something where it's pretty sneaky, kind of high upside for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and as a note, after Thielen went out, Legette's snap share increased substantially. I want to say he played every snap after that. I can't confirm that right now. The last two notes I had on here, the answer to the Rams wide receivers while Kupp and Puka are out was Tutu Atwell, but more realistic answer is none of the above, because the Rams went out of their infamous 11 personnel. I didn't think we'd ever see the day, Drico, when Sean McVay waved goodbye to 11 personnel. It turns out all it takes is having to put Tutu Atwell, Demarcus Robinson, and Jordan Whittington out there as your three wide receivers, or Tyler Johnson, to really make a man not want to play three wide receivers. So the Rams switched to two tight ends instead of playing a third receiver. Is Tutu Atwell at all useful, or is this just a complete stay away for the wide receivers on the Rams?
I think Tutu is useful for kind of a waiver pickup, because he did have some big games last year.
Okay. The last guy I had here as a note is Jordan Addison. Sounds promising for him to potentially be back this week, and you're getting a receiver that should be the second option in a highly efficient offense where their quarterback is leading the league in touchdown rate, and he's free. He's free this week. You can get him as your last overall pick, on Underdog in weekly formats right now.
Yeah, we love free Jordan Addison.
Yeah, I think this is and you want something really fun, Drico? You want to hear it? You're getting the Packers and Vikings playing. Now, for deep lore ball knowers, you'll remember that Justin Jefferson has famously been shut down by the Packers in some past games. And so if you get Justin Jefferson being fully shut down here, do we get the Jordan Addison eruption game? I think I lost Drico. And then do we get to bring it back with Jayden Reed as Jordan Love makes his return to play?
Sorry, I'm sorry. Say that.
That's okay. Jordan Addison with a Jayden Reed bring back.
That sounds pretty fun.
Yeah.
Where you have I guess some of you've got risk there because you've got Jordan Addison returning from high ankle sprain injury. You've got Jordan Love coming back from an injury. I feel better about Jordan Love coming back because his position doesn't require quite as dynamic athleticism. But that is pretty fun. That's a pretty fun, like, you've definitely seen crazier things than guys come back from injuries and then like explode. But you certainly have risk there. Like, but you're getting the discount that comes with the risk right now. You're getting more than the discount. It's when you have to pay the expensive price for the risk that you avoid it.
Yep. I don't think there were any other notes I had here. Did you have any other guys you wanted to touch on here, Drico, before you get us out of here?
So I know I missed some of it. Did you talk anything about kind of Christian Watson having his snaps eating into by Wicks?
I did not.
So I think that's important. To me, that makes it even with Jordan Love back, that does make it pretty. That feels pretty tricky to start either of them. You need one of those guys to kind of consolidate. I guess there's leagues where you kind of just have to start them and hope that you get that big play. But that I'll pull up the exact stat now. But Christian Watson having his routes and snaps eaten into that's to me that's pretty devastating considering the price you paid there.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
So Christian Watson down to 60%, then Tavian Wicks up to 52%. And then you've got Dobbs and Reed at 72 and 88%. So Jayden Reed at 72% last week, Dobbs at 88%, and that's just last week because it's the kind of like the loss in time. But it does feel like you can only really play those two guys with confidence.
Yeah.
Jeez, but I know you touched on this a lot. Jayden Reed still with 33% target rate, I should say.
Yeah, no, Jayden Reed, one of the best receivers in the league already.
Yeah. Well, I apologize everyone for my audio issues, and thank you, Sack, for taking us through. I'll charge my hearing aids ahead of the podcast next week.
All right, that'll do it for week 3. Thanks everybody, and we will see you next week.
See you next week.